The awkward wait before a webinar begins. For those listening, Kara and I were joking about making small talk, but then we realized that you guys would just have to listen to our small talk. So wait it out.
We figured we'd spare you. All right. So we're about 2 minutes in. I guess we'll just go through some housekeeping, and then Noah will give his introduction, and then people can continue to hop on once you get started. So if you want to go to the housekeeping, hello everyone. My name is Kara Matsune. I'm the field marketing manager for North America at Branch. So thank you guys so much for joining us on this webinar. Before Noah gets started sharing all of his knowledge and expertise, we're going to just go over a couple of housekeeping items. So the first thing is that the audience is going to be muted today, but you'll have a chance to submit questions. So we'll be managing them and do a live Q&A at the end. So you should see a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to submit any questions you have throughout the session, and then we'll address them at the very end. This webinar is going to be recorded. So if you miss anything, or if you have any colleagues that you want to share this with, we will be sharing the recording after the webinar. And then finally, if you have any ways for us to improve, we welcome the feedback. So please send that to webinars@branch.io. And we, like I said, really would appreciate that. With that being said, Noah, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Hey everyone, thanks Kara. So it's good to be connecting with you guys all today. So super excited. It's been something that Kara and I have been preparing for. So I thought it might be useful to start with some fun facts about me. So I speak Italian semi-fluently, and by that I mean that I could understand like 10% of people and could speak like 5%. So let's call that semi-fluent. I've eaten some really weird foods over time. So alligator, kangaroo, and possum are the ones I noted here, all in Australia. They eat some weird stuff over there. But I refuse to eat seafood, which is like my wife's biggest frustration point. And my favorite book of all time is The Last Lecture. So I don't know, the various people in the call maybe, or in the webinar may be familiar with it. If not, it's about this lecturer who had to do a lecture as if it was the last one that he would ever be able to do before he passed away. In the process, he found out he actually was passing away. And it's just all life lessons, really interesting stuff. So recommend it highly if you haven't checked it out. Some background on my experience. So I've been at Branch for about 18 months now, a year and a half, a little over, I guess, at this point. Before Branch, I was at Yelp for 2 years, but prior to that, I had built my own mobile deep linking platform. It was called Deep Link. We really owned the SEO on that. And we scaled up. We were around for about 7.5, almost 8 years. Unfortunately, at the end, Branch ate our lunch. So it was very much a can't beat them, join them situation. Here I am, thrilled to be here. It's a great company and looking forward to talking through a lot of this stuff, but I certainly have a lot of background on the deep linking side. I focus here at Branch on a number of verticals, but FinTech and really FinServe are two that I'm particularly close with. So I have a lot of clients on that side. I've certainly heard a lot of anecdotes, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of that here today. Much of my career, certainly the second half of my career, has been based on search, on matching an intent with a thing, whatever that thing is. And I think it was Yaron Galai from Outbrain who originally called it manufactured serendipity. So the idea of harnessing whatever the user's looking for and matching that up to whatever is the next thing that they might do. And so that's really been my biggest point of focus. And as we talk through that, I think you'll probably see shades of that in the way I personally view the industry and kind of where there's opportunity for financial apps. So as we move through, what our hope today is that by the end of the day, you're going to have some more context. And so finance is this very massive umbrella term, obviously. And so with this continued blurring of the lines, I think most apps have some financial component in them, whatever that might be. So for the purposes of this webinar, we really wanted to hone it down a bit. And we're really focusing on retail banking, insurance, traditional trading, and crypto trading. And so that's really going to be most of the use cases we talk through, and probably most of the anecdotes we get through as we talk through tactics. So if all goes according to plan, we hope that today you'll walk away with a really good handle on the inherent value of the mobile app for reducing churn, increasing revenue via better consumer relationship, and really minimizing the cost to service, which we really spend a lot of time on here, and how the app could help in that goal. Further, we want to discuss strategies for driving app adoption as quickly as possible. It's really a ticking time bomb. And so we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to delve into not just the strategies, but the real world tactics that sort of attach and moor themselves to those strategies and how to move forward with that. So starting at the top here, why financial brands really need a good mobile app that really connects with their users. And I mean, I think there's a lot of answers and a lot of directions to go in here. But one of the first things that we put together, one of the first things that we noticed is the importance of churn, or the relevance of churn. The struggle's real. And so this is specific to retail banking, but one of the studies I read, actually the one that's sourced here, said attrition is the tax that every financial institution levies upon itself. I thought that really sums it up, because it says it's a thing, but it doesn't have to be a thing. And I think that that's a pretty eloquent and thoughtful way to look at it. So just some stats here. Banks turn over about 12% of their customer base in the average year, which is shockingly high. And 80% of those churns are done by people who have 2 or 1 account with the bank. And so really what this means is the average financial institution is expecting to replace its entire client base every 8 years or so. And that necessitates an aggressive sort of focus on growth and to replace all that lost volume. And so other financial categories are going to fall on one side or the other of these numbers. For instance, insurance may not be quite as drastic because of externalities like users being in contract, or sort of costs and difficulty of getting into new plans. There's a lot of things like that. Whereas fintech and payment apps, for instance, would likely be on the higher end of this. They might have a very high churn rate just because it's low switching costs. It's really easy on, easy off. But as we kick this off with the premise that churn is a very expensive problem, I think it's interesting to look at some of this data. What's interesting here is we really looked at retention for apps over time. And so you'll notice that while banking is the highest of the group, and I think that or the highest retention of the group, it's certainly not a surprise there. These numbers are still pretty staggering to think that over a year period from this study, that was 43% of people who are using a bank app are churning. I mean, these numbers are really telling. What's interesting is this far right graph. This is a 90-day retention after a love dialogue. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with a love dialogue, it is a sort of very simple modal window that says, are you liking this app or not? And it's a binary yes or no. And it's just one simple way to engage with your users and solicit feedback. And just based on that very, very sort of simplistic tool, there's a massive height in retention, or peak in retention for those users. So I think this indicates that clients like to engage and have a sense of value in providing feedback. It certainly shows that the more sort of engagement you have with a client, the better. So what's an install worth? And this is often the way we think about things broadly. So this data is very specific to the sort of financial sector. However, at Branch, much of our story is around sewing app growth into this broader sort of acquisition strategy, because the app, in many cases, is the sole, or at least the main touch point for a user. As such, building an app install intent is synonymous with like sort of the new customer experience. So in a rubric like that, so think about maybe like dating or restaurant apps, things like that. Within that sort of paradigm, CPIs and ROAS are the sort of performance indicators to maximize for. But with the industries you guys represent, really in the financial sector, your apps are unique from pretty much every app, because while having a high quality app certainly represents a value point for your end user and has an influence on which brands they may choose to work with, the app is rarely the first touch point for the consumer. And there may be some exceptions, but I think since your app is not the gateway to that relationship, and it's not going to be the first thing they see, it makes it a little harder to quantify the overall value in the customer acquisition cost. However, apps do have a massive influence on these second level metrics, these KPIs, essentially everything to the right of this dotted line. So reducing the cost to serve for each customer, doubling down on the incrementality for each customer, and maintaining a pathway to build sort of more momentum for more features, more SKUs to add on over time, and more personalization are all reasonably easy wins with a strong app strategy, and will produce the most efficient funnel for incremental revenue over time. So, I mean, I think with this slide, really the end lesson, or the key takeaway is you don't want to live on the left side. It is very easy to do, and it's very common. when you're focusing on CPIs and return on spend. Maybe it's not ad spend, but maybe it's media spend overall or whatever that might be. That's often a myopic way to look at it. You really have to take a longer view here and think about all these other things in the CLTV and make sure that you're maximizing for everything. So think about it holistically. So as we thought about the cost to serve, we thought about all of these sort of inherent, like vestigial organs of a financial institution. And look, again, depending on where your specific business or category might be in evolution, some of these might not be as relevant. But sort of this is, again, very relevant for insurance, traditional banking. When you think about all these things like sending invoices over mail and bills, and that represents this massive overhead cost. And so we wanted to sort of chart that out. And so we used some publicly available data and some information that some of our clients have told us. And so we got an estimate that as much as it can cost as much as 50 cents per sheet that is sent to an end user. And if you figure on a 5-sheet invoice, that would mean 60 sheets sent per year per user. And that doesn't include ancillary sort of paper that might be in the envelope or direct mail that might go off in a different send. But based on that, on these 60 sheets sent each year, that would equate to about $30 per customer. And if you extrapolate that over 100,000 customers, you're looking at $3 million in sunk cost just to serve your customers. It's obviously a pretty significant amount of money on only 100,000 customers. One bank that we work with also noted that they save about $2 for every check that's deposited via the mobile app. It's really significant. I was shocked by that number. If a user is going to deposit, let's say 25 checks a year, that's $50 in savings. And again, on that same subset or set, I should say, of 100,000 users, that's $5 million in savings, all just from having a really strong digital tool. And then call centers are the other one that we wanted to highlight. It's a majorly leaky bucket. According to a Bain study that we researched, the vast majority of service calls to a financial institution, they specifically noted were to handle to handle routine transactions. Something that could be easily done in an app environment, certainly. And so with a cost of $5 a call, which is about the median of what we saw quoted in a number of different places, and estimating 2 calls per year, which might be on the low side, but conservatively. So you're talking about $1 million in call center costs for those 100,000 customers. So these numbers are not insignificant. And so as you start looking to try to really double down on making as much money as possible from each member or each customer, that's where the app comes in to try to solve for a lot of this stuff. So let's talk about honing the mobile strategy and some of the strategies to do that. So we know that churn's high in finance generally, and supporting customers is a massive expense. So how do we drive longer or a stronger LTV over time? So we look at this as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So first off, it's a focus on growth, and that's really key. So growth is focusing on growth in the context of moving your existing customers to the app as quickly as possible and with as little friction as possible. And so really, I mentioned this in the onset, but time is your enemy here. So for each minute that a customer isn't in the app, they're going to be of a higher rate of churn. And so you want to attack that as soon as possible. So your existing customers who have been with your institution, these customers are going to be the fastest to convert to other products, least expensive opportunities, and they're going to have the highest propensity for leveraging more products over time, more SKUs, and leveraging also less expensive means for service. So like the app. And again, there may be some exceptions there. I mean, I think certainly there's going to be an age component there as well, whereas people who are younger might be more likely. But as a general rule, those are the people that you want to attack first and get into your app. So the next piece here is doubling down on retaining these users with added functionality, ease of use, and personalization. We're going to talk through this as we get through tactics a little later on, but this is going to be a key component as well. So basically, you want to get rid of any possible barrier that an account holder may have to doing whatever they want to do in the app. And so we've all been through these experiences where you may have a financial app of any sort or an insurance app, and you click on a link and it spits you out of the app to the web to do a thing. Or it opens a sort of a modal window or like a Safari view controller, like a web window inside of the app. This isn't ideal. It typically is slower. It's not as conducive with sort of the way people view apps. All of those things are just friction that needs to be removed as soon as possible to maximize LTV. So lastly, and as much as possible, and I think realistically it's going to be impossible to get to zero, but you want to, as much as possible, get rid of traditional interaction mechanisms like the mailed invoices and person-to-person customer service. And this is going to reduce your cost to serve and increase operating margins quite quickly if you can do it right. So these strategic investments will feed into each other quite quickly, again, creating more efficiency in your mobile strategy and just build for a better experience for your users over time. So when you have hundreds of mobile tools at your disposal, and look, I recognize marketers are looking at tons of different things and different opportunities via personalization, via app tools, all types of things. You need to think carefully about how you're going to deploy them and what are your strategic goals and which tactics are you going to use to accomplish that goal. So I wanted to be sure to be very clear about the differentiation between strategy and tactics. And so I think the most relevant quote I saw, there's this old cliche that's misattributed often to Sun Tzu from The Art of War, and it's strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, whereas tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And I think that that's really true. These have to work in tandem. They're very dependent on each other. So as we continue on, I'm going to differentiate between strategies that are going to assist you in driving app adoption versus tactics that are the on-the-ground examples of how other brands have successfully mobilized their users. So let's think about this playbook. And so there's a checklist here of a number of different sort of flavors of ways to do these things. So the first strategy that you're going to want to focus on is moving your users to the app as rapidly as possible in their customer journey. And so again, we've already talked about this in some length, but this can be done in myriads of ways. I think the first opportunity you get is the moment a user signs up, and wherever that might be. So if it's a brick and mortar location, if it's a bank, for instance, perhaps it's not, perhaps it's crypto and the user gets an email. Maybe they come in through a tweet, whatever it might be. The minute a user shows interest and perhaps signs up or opens an account with your service, that's the first time you want to drive an app install. And so we're going to break these down in strategies shortly, but that's really the first piece here. The second tenet of your strategy should squarely focus on driving app engagement for those users who already have the app. The clients who are already in your app, we talked about how they're the highest value. They should have no issue getting to the app and getting to specific services. And so this looks like a lot of different things, but this is when they get an email to try a new feature. When they tap that email, it should go to that feature. It shouldn't just go to the homepage. And so there's a lot of sort of tactical things that you can do to improve that flow. So this is something that you'll see often at Branch in various webinars and sort of published materials. We call it the acquisition pyramid. And that was coined by Reed Kuhn, who is our lead strategy consultant, I believe is his title. And so he built this out. And the general idea here is we know that your app users are your best customers. And this is the cream of the crop. I'm going to call it that often because that's often how Reed calls it. And so these are your cream of the crop users. And depending on your own evolution, that may represent either a minority or even a majority, hopefully, of your customer base. But whatever that percentage is, it's going to be the people who have figuratively the highest LTV, they're the most engaged. And really that's why apps are a thing. Right? So your mission is to tap into your whole customer base and turn them into those cream of the crop users who have this very high propensity for using your tools. So there's a lot of layers here. The good news is that you already have a whole bunch of traffic sitting on these platforms. You have mobile web traffic, and that's really leaned in and highly engaged, and we'll talk through that shortly. Desktop traffic is generally quite strong, and again, it's going to range based on subcategory, but there's all these users on the desktop, and figuring out ways to smoothly move them to the app is a thing, and it's a really really efficient way to drive more app users. And lastly, you have offline users. And so that might be brick and mortar traffic. Again, if you're a traditional bank, if you're not a retail bank, perhaps it's something like out of home media. And there's some other things that we're going to talk through shortly, but there's all types of ways to get an offline user into the app. And most of it centers around QR codes, and we're going to talk about that. But going from strategy to tactical, we're going to start with those offline users and how we can best move them into your app world. So offline user strategies they really come in a number of different flavors, but QR codes are really the mechanism to tap into that. but you have massive flexibility in how you wield them and how you mobilize that effort. And that's all going to go back to attribution, attributing where installs are coming from, where downstream events in your app are coming from, and which QR codes, in this case, at least for offline users, are driving those actions. So here we go with examples. So Credit Karma is one that I think is super interesting. So we saw this on a Credit Karma mailer. It's a branded QR. It's very easy to use. Now, if you imagine this mailer without that QR code, so Credit Karma, of course, very digital centric brand. Well, then what? So they get this mailer and then they have to, a user has to then go to a website and type in that URL. That's just clunky, not ideal, inefficient. So the idea here is removing all that friction. User can scan this, go directly, in this case, lands on the mobile website, and then can click right through to get the app from the smart banner at the top. Now, I don't know much about Credit Karma's strategy, so I don't know, but in many cases, this could be attributable. There's a number of ways that you can leverage this to pass user through the install. So a user you can reduce the friction for the user in the onboarding flow. There's a number of things like that. And in this case, it looks like they're actually passing through a specific offer to the users. So there's a number of very interesting ways you can leverage that. We're going to talk about offers and sort of incentivization in a bit. This is a Geico example that I love. It happens to be very seasonally relevant, but that's totally coincidence. This is from last year around Halloween. This is a branch customer. So this was a branch powered QR code. Once this QR code is scanned, the user is taken directly to the App Store and prompted to download. So this differs from the Credit Karma example where a user landed on the website. In this case, goes directly to the App Store. And once opened, they go to this sort of like augmented reality experience that Geico had built. Great branding, really clever way to sort of expand your brand, make it fun, make it more folksy, less serious. So I think there's some really cool things that you can do in kind of similar flows, but all powered by a QR code. So funny, QR codes were a thing for like a gazillion years, and it wasn't until like the last 18 months that they became so ubiquitous. And on the mobile side, it's a perfect thing to take advantage of. So another example that I thought was particularly relevant here is Singlife. So this is in Singapore. The idea is this was out of home media. I believe this was either in a bus station or a train station, but this QR powers a user to go directly through. And actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure what happens when a user opens the app the first time, but quite easily, this could lead to going in to apply for this offer, for instance, or whatever it might be. So just capturing the intent of that user at that moment is great, because there's very few situations where a user is going to see this sign and then in that moment go through and type in the website and all that. Obviously, they're walking somewhere and that's going to be their biggest focus. So this really makes it easy for the user. So I'll admit now that this is my only out of vertical example, but I just thought it was too perfect. So Belk has QR codes all over their stores, and we saw this and just thought it was the perfect thing to bring up. So certainly Belk as a retailer, it might not be relevant to, or I would assume it's not relevant to pretty much all of you guys. However, you can very easily see how this might be very relevant to a bank. And so imagine being in a bank or a financial institution, insurance company, whatever it might be, and these QR codes existing everywhere. So you open an account and all over the place, it's click here or scan to download this app. Very clean, very easy. You can even put it on business cards. You can put it on checks. I mean, there's so many ways to really make sure that all the real estate that you own already is working for you to drive users into your really best digital atmosphere. So final one, and I can't even read it, but I can tell you for sure that it's an example from True Money, and they serve this internationally, and this QR code is in media. And so I think this is a perfect example of TV media. We have other out of vertical examples of these types of things that from branch customers that have worked really well. But since this was finance specific, I really wanted to highlight it. I've seen this a lot more recently, just in my own personal life. I'm a big football fan. So as the football season started, I've seen this with a couple betting apps where they'll serve a QR code on the commercial for 15 seconds. I saw it from Touch of Modern, which is if you guys don't know, sort of a high-end retailer. So this seems to be becoming quite ubiquitous and common. I love it. I think, again, the idea of signing off from watching something on Hulu and then going to type in a URL, to me, feels very clunky and unwieldy. And being able to do this very cleanly, and again, if it's incentivized to in the case of Touch and Modern, get $5 off or whatever might be their offer, things like that. I mean, I think that that's a really cool and useful UI. So users gained from customer referrals tend to be, I should say, the stickiest cohort for us. Now, this isn't applicable to every single vertical or sort of subcategory in finance. So for those that where this is relevant, this represents a massive pool of potential users. So I think particularly in the crypto space, this is certainly major. And I know many of the crypto brands, and we're going to talk about that shortly, really have doubled down here. But this is probably the most rich tactic for driving high value customers. So the way to build referrals into your user flows are vast. It really depends on what you're trying to do, what your end goal is, and how your business model works. However, if you do leverage referrals, there's really two tactics that have proven to be particularly successful for your clients. And before I get into the examples, I just want to take you through those. So one is making them personalized and carrying that personalization all the way through. And so the example I'm going to show you shortly really highlights this, but the idea is not just for the person who's doing the referral to see a really clean flow, but then to make it very clean all the way through. So Kara, for instance, shares something with me. When I click, I see, oh, Kara shared this with you. Click here to install the app. Then when I install the app saying, hey, Kara wants you to have $10 in your, in your account, whatever it might be. So I think that there is, that's key. What we've seen is the folks who follow that personalization all the way through the process, there tends to be much more cohesion. I can think of a product I bought very recently that didn't do that. And it was really disappointing and sort of unnerving. I wasn't really sure if the person who referred me actually got credit. It just felt very uncomfortable. It ended up requiring me to reach out to customer service. So it's another cost. So there's a lot of downside there. The second thing here is incentivizing that flow. And we've talked a lot about this. This is quite common in the crypto side, but be sure that you're offering some sort of value to that user. And you can toy with that. And there's a number of ways to A/B test and see what works. But remember that you'll be paying for that user wherever they came from. So you might actually be saving money and getting a more valuable user. But those are really the two common tenets. So this is Robinhood Branch client. So this is all powered by Branch in this case. But Robinhood's referral flow is, in my opinion, best in class. And I actually went through it when I signed up for Robinhood, so I know personally. But they show a very clean, very easy to read message to the referrer and loop directly into the share sheet. So what that means is instead of, if I'm to share this with Kara, for instance, I don't have to type in Kara's address. Instead, I can just loop into texting a link that's really clean and it's branded as Robinhood. So it doesn't, in this case, say Branch, it's private labeled. And so user clicks through, goes through the install process. First thing they see when they open the app is that, hey, in this case, Tyler is inviting you to Robinhood. Click here to get your free stock. This is, again, I can't say it enough. I don't mean to go too crazy on it, but this is one of all of the use cases that we have at Branch. This is one of the, I think, best used and sort of best implemented. So really clean. And I always love to share this awesome example of not only referral, but sharing and personalization. So I think there's an old adage, I keep throwing adages at you guys, but another one often is that not all content is created equal. And I think that's also true as far as users who come from content. So users who come from search are going to have very different intent bases than folks who come in from a referral, for instance, or from email. It's just the nature of it. So with this in mind, why always serve them the same thing? And so I think what's interesting is when you look at brands who are doing a really good job of breaking those sort of offers out, or sort of the content appearance out by where that user came from. So in this case, this is a nerd wallet that we were able to find through research. So we actually use this visual in another part of the presentation in a little bit, but it's just so strong for two reasons. The first one here that I want to highlight is, again, the way they personalize the content based on where the user came from. So NerdWallet's adjusting that web tap messaging, and it's hard to see here, but you will see it. But in each one of these cases, whether the user came from search, organically, organic social, or paid social, they're seeing different verbiage on these pages. And then once they, this smart banner or whatever version of smart banner that they have here actually says different things. And I'm going to show you that. but this is all sort of content-driven acquisition. So use this data, use all the data that comes in from the origin point. So if you know they're searching for auto loans, why drop them on a page that then forces them to select which loan product they're interested in? Use that and get them further along in the funnel just by leveraging what you already know kinetically. So desktop to app is typically the clunkiest, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but this tends to be the clunkiest flow because someone's not even holding their mobile phone. And so how do you do this in a real clean way? How do you drive adoption from these users? Now, the fact of the matter is, though, that it's a massive group. I mean, typically there's a very significant number of desktop users. So you want to have some mechanism to do it. And so let's talk about tactics there. So each gateway to your product may support some sort of different intent. Clicks from email messaging may convert at a higher rate. But in the case of desktop to app, what really tends to work the best is QR codes placed directly on the site. So this is free app adoption really here, because you have all these users on your website. What's quite common, and in this case, you can see here that on First Republic, what they do is they host these badges, these iOS and Play Store badges, but the links don't do anything because you're on a desktop, of course. So you click through and then you're just in the App Store with not much to do. And so lost opportunity. But what they've done is augmented that with a QR code that does a lot. User can just say, who doesn't have their phone within arm's reach at any given moment? So user can scan this QR code, go directly to the app, and you could even then pass them to a specific page if you wanted to. Certainly you can attribute it and you can know how many users have installed from this flow. And so there's a number of very interesting ways you can measure and start cohorting users by the way that they're leveraging these flows. So some interesting things to use here, but these links alone, these badge app icons, which are everywhere, they're really bridges to nowhere. They don't do anything. And I think we really need to, as sort of a broader level industry, be smarter about how we're leveraging tools to get desktop users to the app. Second example here is from Monice. And so this is, at this point, I think it's probably a declining way to leverage it or to leverage these users, but this is Text Me the App. The idea here being that user types in their phone number, and once they click Get Started, they get this link that drives an install. So there's a lot of value here. I think with I guess you can say the proliferation of QR codes over the last 18 months to 2 years through pandemics and quarantine, I think people have gotten much more comfortable with QR codes. However, this is still an alternative and an option that many folks leverage today. So I think there's a lot of different things you can employ. And really, you don't have to do one or the other. You really could do both. And there's probably other things you can do as well. So mobile web users have always been this significant value line. They fall somewhere in the spectrum between unconverted, low funnel prospects with very high intent, and that would be kind of the first group, or at the other end of the sort of polar spectrum, the current clients with suboptimal user experiences. These folks who use your mobile website to log in and manage their account or do whatever financial services they may do. In either case, they have extremely high intent and they're very leaned in, and they should be ready to be migrated into your app. So the question is, what tactics will help you move those users from your mobile web to the app? So really the way to do it, though, is through thoughtfully positioned calls to action on the website, like banners and interstitials. And we've seen some examples of this already. And I want to talk through sort of how we look at this at Branch, certainly the way I think about this for myself. So this is a 2-click process. And so first the user has to click on the app, click to get to the App Store, and then they have to click to install. So what does that do? That creates a massive opportunity for drop off. But what we're finding is in finance specifically, and what you can see is highlighted here, is the intent of the finance vertical user is extremely high. This is mapped out here. So the x-axis represents percentage of people who click through on an install call to action, while the y-axis represents the people who then click through and proceed to install. And so really reasonably high on the view to click rate, very high on the click to install rate. And so what that means is that users who are clicking over from the web want apps. It's not sort of just a passive exploration. They want that app. And so that means that we have to give it to them and make sure that it's in the right place at that right time. So further, the way our product is called Journeys, and this web to app tool. So the way we think about this is as a funnel. I'm sorry, as a dial is the way we think about this. And so you want to turn this up based on the user's intent. So high funnel users who are visiting your page for the first time may get a casual message, something that looks like this Under Armour example. It may just look like the iOS sort of system level smart banners. Very simple, not in your face. Some people even put it at the bottom instead of the top. So it's not heavy and it feels very sort of comfortable. But as a user engages further, and perhaps maybe it's an deep engaged user who already has an account or is already logged in, maybe you want to serve them something more like this example on the right here, which I believe is ZocDoc. And the idea being that you're making it extremely clean and easy to get the app, and it's right in their face. Now, they could close it, for instance. You can see a little X on the top right, but it's loud. It gives them a more visibility into what the opportunity is with the app, and it makes it extremely easy to follow that through. And again, not only is it attributable, but you can also pass that data through so that the user's onboarded flow is much cleaner. And we're going to talk about some examples there as well in a bit. So this is a best-in-class example of leveraging. This is I mentioned earlier that we were doubling up on this NerdWallet example. I wanted to zoom in here on these calls to action. So you're seeing different sort of banner creative. I tend not to love to call these banners, but creative messaging on each one of these units. And you can see that not only are they toying around with the messaging, they're also toying around with the colors. And I think that this is a very interesting experimentation. We've seen that the return on these types of experiments are quite vast. So we offer A/B testing, things like that. And we tend to see that it's shocking how different a simple change might be. So something like changing the color of the get button from, in this case, white to green, massive difference. So I don't know that in this case, but I'm saying that often is the case. And so they're doing a ton of experimentation here, tailoring not only that call to action, but the visuals. And I'm sure they're much wiser for it as they go through. SoFi is another great example here. And so US-based financial company known for loan products, and it's really digital because they're mobile first. This means that each mobile web interaction sort of represents some kinetic conversion opportunity. Again, it tends to be less passive users. They support those App Store badges, but it is in mobile, so they actually would work to do something. However, they also support a much better version of that with this banner on the bottom right here. So they've taken the absolute minimum of those smart banner icons, which even though they would lead to drive an app install, they're unattributed. They just go to the App Store link. They've also added in a much deeper level sort of tool, not only for personalization and measurement, but also deeper functionality for the user, because then you can pass data through and the user can go to specific pages once inside the app. Oops. Sorry, jumped around a bit. Capital One UK is another example that we found in the wild here. So another best-in-class example. This one is particularly useful because this is highly customized and it's based on the user's flow. So in this example, the flow here, and follow me with this, users clicked from an email and got into the Safari page on the left. So the idea here is, it's hard to see, it might be hard for you to see, but right above the Get the App button, it says, this will expire in 2 hours. So this is sort of like a tokened way to log the user, not only drive the user through to download the app, but then to log the user into the app. And recognizing there's security concerns and everyone has to handle that differently. Perhaps what you might do is do something like this, where the user gets in and only has to put in their password, for instance, or something along those lines. But you can use some sort of, what's often called a magic link, to drive the user all the way through this flow in a really nice way. But the key part here is this visual. And so getting a user to a really clean UI that tells them exactly what they're getting and why they should get it. And I mean, I think this says it all, 50% click to install rates, which is an amazing stat that I think all of us should aspire for. So finally, we have your app users, and these are your cream of the crop users. And once they're in, you can now access push notifications to get to them, in-app messaging, and all types of other modal notification tools to keep them informed of app features and special offers. This is where you can really turn up the dial, as I've used earlier, turn up the dial as far as getting your users to use more features, be more involved, leaned in, and really make your experience sing. It's where you're going to drive longer term retention and make a long-term user out of someone who very possibly could have been a shorter term user before and churned quite quickly. So two examples that I wanted to highlight, Amex and Citi. In both cases, well, I'll use Amex first. So Amex is recognizing, this is a screenshot from me. So they were recognizing trends in my purchasing habits. I go every morning to go to get a Starbucks. They know that, and they put those up right up front and center. Not only that, but I received an email. When I clicked the email, I got directly to this page. So it removed all friction for me to get to the thing that they want me to get to. Very clean, really easy. And they also serve me a lot of lookalike offers from other coffee shops, from things they know might be near the Starbucks that I go to. So really interesting stuff. You can also see cut off at the very bottom is Delta, another brand that I frequent, not as much over the last 18 months, but nonetheless. So they've clearly tailored this very much to me. Citi puts in a similar flow, but certainly a different product. Citi is putting an additional loan product directly in front of me on login. First thing I saw, it wasn't like I got to an account screen and then saw this. I saw this first. You can see the background is grayed out, and this is front and center. So this can apply to any category. So if you're in a crypto app, you can feature a seasonal referral bonus. If you're a car insurance app, you can highlight some sort of defensive driving course or an upcoming renewal, whatever you want. There's all types of options, but in either case, you're personalizing this to the user's journey as opposed to just landing them on an account screen, which might be fine 90, 80, 75% of the time, whatever that number is. But the point of the matter is when there's something personal, you want to get it in front of your user. And this is the perfect time to catch a user in sort of research context, and not only to sell to them, but also learn about what moves them. I think one of the keys here is that it's not only about what they say yes to, but what they say no to. You're going to learn a ton of data from that. In many cases, more data about the things that they're not interested in. And you can sort of pull back the reins on those types of things. So we're just about up on time here. I just want to close this out with some takeaways. So each moment that your customers are not engaging with your app, they're at a higher churn risk. And I mentioned this earlier, the clock is ticking. So get your user into the app and migrate them as soon as you possibly can. From the second that they become a customer, get them to be an app customer, and that should be your focus. And by migrating customers to the app, you're not only adding more opportunities for cross-sells, upsells, but also cutting your costs and improving the overall service to the user. And as I mentioned earlier, be sure that you're not being myopic in the way you view this. Focus on the long game and all of these strategies in tandem. There's no, in almost every case, I would say actually in every case, there's no magic bullet. These all have to be worked together. And then use the data. In the world of a binary, as I noted, a no is as good as a yes or better in many cases. Leverage everything you know, use that to power the models about what you're presenting to clients, and understand your clients better and allow you to be a better financial institution because of it. So I want to hand it over to questions, and I want to bring Kara back in.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for attending. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A. We have received a couple, so Noah, I'll shoot them over to you. So the first question is, how should I be thinking about the onboarding flow if my app can't support registration? I don't want to drive app installs on the first visit.
Yeah, this is a common point, something we deal with often. If your customer is about to convert, the last thing you want to do is add friction, and it's totally logical, right? So I think there's a number of ways to handle that. I think what I've seen personally most frequently is holding off on the install messaging till post install. Ironic, because I just told you the clock is ticking on getting that user, but the fact of the matter is you want to get them as a customer first, and then focus on the app acquisition side. So at least for Branch, and I'm sure other brands and even some homegrown tools, you can hold back on that messaging till the moment that they've converted and become customers. So it's always an option and something I would encourage you to think about.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, you mentioned that there's some value in the users not engaging with specific things. Can you elaborate on how I can use that data?
Yeah, sure. So top level, I mean, if you're an insurance company and you push out some sort of, push as a non-push notification, but you message your clients in some way that says, would you be interested in auto insurance at a lower rate? And the client says no, that's going to give you some indication about where their head's at. Or maybe it's more generic things like, do you also own a home and would you be interested in an umbrella policy, whatever it might be. So use those tools to double down on the things that are most interesting to them. And that's going to go not just for insurance, but certainly for loan products and banks, things like that. Crypto, or sort of trading apps in general, like for instance, in Robinhood, you may be just trading regular stocks. Maybe Robinhood pushes and says, would you be interested in trading crypto? So there's all types of ways to leverage the data about what people are not interested in to target, to sort of build cohorts and target them accordingly.
Awesome. Thank you. We've got another question in here. What tactic have brands generally done well and which have been generally missed?
Yeah, I think the list of what on both lists is long. I think what jumps out to me as a massive opportunity, and I certainly highlighted it probably multiple times here, is the offline to mobile flow. That is either broken or non-existent in so many places, and it always irks me to see. And again, to go back to traditional banking, it's so rare to see a really clean flow from offline to that bank's app. And I noticed there are certain banks that have done it well and have tried to really build a cohesive experience, but it just seems often broken. So that seems to be a massive, I wouldn't say low-hanging fruit, but reasonably low-hanging fruit, let's call it. So I think, Kara, that's one thing that jumps out to me. I think something that people have done really well is smart banners, and I think there's still a lot of opportunity to grow. I think the fact of the matter is that the operating systems have made it very easy to employ smart banners, and that's the first step. Now, I think honing those in on specific messaging and things like that, that takes more work working with someone like Branch, or there's other brands out there as well. But making those really sing, I think, is sort of the second step. But the first step, there's very few banks or financial institutions that really haven't really leveraged that. The final thing I'll note here in response to your question, Kara, is I think the newer financial institutions, really crypto is what jumps to mind, have done a much an exquisite job of driving app engagement. They seem to be the most leaned in on how to leverage deep linking, deferred deep linking, which for clarity is linking through the app install process. We talked about it in a few of these use cases. And they've done a really commendable job in making that as smooth as possible. And it makes sense, right? Because that is their business, they're digital and mobile first. So it certainly makes sense. And I'd certainly love to see it.
Awesome. It looks like I think those are all the questions that we've received from you guys. So thank you so much for submitting your questions. And if you want to go to the last and final slide. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you have any feedback, as we mentioned in the beginning, please feel free to let us know at the link below, or you can email us at webinars@branch.io. Other than that, thank you for attending, and thank you, Noah, for sharing your insight, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.